Some places carry shadows etched deep into the very stone of the walls that surround them, where history has left scars too deep to fully heal. These are the sites of tragedy, betrayal, and immense suffering, but also resilience, growth, and important lessons. They whisper stories of what humanity is capable of, the worst and the best, and they invite us to listen, to reflect, and to learn. Take the sombre grounds of Auschwitz, where millions were stripped of their humanity, yet the strength of survivors reminds us of the strength of the human spirit. The silence in those barracks carries the weight of the lives that were lost, the echo of injustice that must never be repeated. It teaches us the necessity of vigilance against hatred and the importance of collective memory in safeguarding the future. Or consider the now serene shores of Port Arthur in Tasmania, once the site of both Indigenous and convict suffering, as well as Australia's darkest modern massacre. Today, its peaceful facade hides the brutal history. The ruins, framed by pristine waters and manicured lawns, reminds us how violence can erupt in unexpected places, demanding that we contemplate the fragility of our own safety and the value of compassion of personal experience. These places are not just historical artefacts, they are moral compasses. They force us to confront the consequences of apathy, cruelty, and unchecked power. By walking through these spaces, we inherit a responsibility, because if history has taught us anything, it is this: darkness thrives in silence, and atrocities left unacknowledged pave the way for history to repeat itself. Welcome to If These Trees Could Talk. The team at If These Trees Could Talk wish to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional lands of the Wonnarua Nation. We would like to recognise that we share our stories from the stolen lands of our nation's first storytellers. Our conversations in many ways follow their traditions of storytelling and sharing knowledge and experience. We wish to pay our respect to the Wonnarua elders and ancestors, as well as extend that respect to all First Nations people, including our listeners, and acknowledge and honour their continued connections to the land and waters that have been the inspiration for the stories that we share.
We'd like to extend that acknowledgement to all of the lands that you are listening on today, in particular to the Djabwurrung land on which this story takes place.
There's a massive paranormal interest in Jayward when you take these places where really bad, hard stuff has happened. That tends to be. Among other things, he swallowed razor blades, cut off parts of his ears, his left nipple, injured his genitals, hammered nails into his feet, and swallowed corrosive liquids. Not every person in Jayward was a criminal, but everyone in Jayward was treated as a criminal. This episode contains some content that is just for big people's ears. We're delving into some psychiatric history, and that brings with it some problematic practices and treatments, as well as mentions of self-harm. So if you're here for it, I suggest clearing the room or popping in some headphones if there are little ears around.
Here we go.
Today, we are heading to Ararat, a town in the Central Highlands region of Victoria, about 198 kilometres west of Melbourne. Located at the foothills of the Grampians, which is one of my favourite places, and surrounded by picturesque grazing country, Ararat is the centrepiece in a region of tranquil and inspiring natural attractions, including the Grampians National Park, Mount Larny Gurrin, Mount Cole, Mount Buangor, and the Ararat Hills National Park. We stayed in the Grampians on our last trip, and it was spectacular. It was our first big stop, so we stayed at Yass, and then we headed straight to the Grampians. I was pretty excited. I'd heard lots of stuff about it. we watch 1,000 YouTube videos before we go places, but I could not be prepared for how beautiful this place is. We camped at this little campground right at the back of Hall's Gap, which is the township that's sort of in the middle of the Grampians. And we're right at the back at the bottom of the dam, and we had the creek running down the side. There was so many birds. My favourite photo I've ever taken of myself, which is now my profile picture with the cockatoo on my shoulder, I took there. We would have morning walks and the deer were in the creek, and that's a bit sad because they're not meant to be there. They're not native animals and they destroy it. But to see those big deer come up out of the creek with their massive antlers and stuff was spectacular and devastating at the exact same time. So we spend a fair bit of time there just like hiking around through the mountains. But once you get up to the top of the mountains and you're looking back down into Hall's Gap, which is basically just the valley in between two mountain ranges, the geological feat of whatever the universe did to create that place is so astronomically superb. I've never seen geology like it ever. And it's like these really big black basalty kind of looking rocks. I don't actually know what kind of rocks they are. I probably should have Googled that. Then with this big dam and this beautiful green valley in the middle, it is honestly amazing, and it's full of hikes and waterfalls. And I'm telling you now, put the Grampians on your list.
Done.
So I think we had 3 days there, and then we were leaving and heading towards South Australia. And as we were planning to do this trip, I obviously was like researching old places to go and look at because Victoria is full of them. The nature side is one thing, but I always want the morbid shit too. But none of the places that I had really knew about were within close distance for me to kind of put to the boys and say, can we make a sidetrack and make this work? And then I found out about Ararat. So we made a little diversion. It was a mad rush because we left later than expected to get to Ararat by the time the tour started. And it was worth every second of that mental rush. I'm going to give you a little bit of history about this place. Prior to European settlement, Ararat was inhabited by the Jabwurrung people. Europeans first settled the Grampian regions in 1840 after surveyor Thomas Mitchell passed through the area in 1836. In 1857, a party of Chinese miners en route to central Victorian goldfields struck gold at Kenton Lead, which marked the beginning of the great growth of Ararat. The Chinese community was substantial in Ararat, and the Gum San Chinese Cultural Centre commemorates the history of the community. Ararat is the only town in Australia to be founded by Chinese. Did you know that?
I did not.
There you go. So it would have never existed if the Chinese people didn't come across it and find gold and, we just moved in and turned it into a town. The building of a county jail in Ararat was first explored in 1857. By this time, there were active goldfields in the vicinity and criminal activity was rife. J Ward started its life as one of 3 larger goldfields prisons. The others were at Beechworth and in Pentridge in Melbourne. Construction of the original Ararat County Jail commenced in 1859. The main prison structures were built from bluestone and they are magnificent. Do you know what bluestone is? Do you know what it looks like?
It sounds like something from Minecraft. No.
You probably can mine it in Minecraft. I don't know. It's, imagine sandstone but like a deep steely grey blue. Does that give you a mental image? It's like a really dark coloured sandstone. Oh, maybe that's where I got basalt from. Maybe in like America and stuff they call it basalt. I don't know. Anyway, it's gorgeous. And there are so many bluestone buildings in Victoria. It must be a very viable material around those areas. So a lot of buildings were built from it. Mm-hmm. But that with like the mortar in, the light-coloured mortar in between these really dark bricks.
I think I can see it now.
It makes for a very, very striking building.
We're going to have photos in the show notes?
There will be photos in the show notes, yes. On the 10th of October in 1861, the jail was opened with a total of 21 prisoners incarcerated. In 1863, the gallows were built. By 1864, the jail housed 40 prisoners. On the 15th of August 1870, the first execution was conducted at the jail when Andrew Vere was hung for the murder of Amos Sheil in January 1869. The second execution at the jail was held on the 25th of September in 1883, when Robert Francis Byrne was hanged for the murder of Michael Quinlivan. On the 6th of June 1884, the jail held its third execution, with Harry Morgan being hanged for the murder of Margaret Nolan in November 1883. And this case itself, and I've left the cases out for today because we're more focusing on what this jail became, but that is a really particularly terrible case. So if you like true crime, I suggest Googling Harry Morgan and what led him to the gallows. It is such a horrible, horrible story.
I don't particularly love true crime.
I don't suggest you Google it.
But I'm going to have to Google it.
It's for the weirdos. It's not.
Oh,
yeah, I'm sorry.
Remember the time you told me not to look up carbuncle?
Yeah. This is probably worse. Margaret Nolan was a 10-year-old girl. It's not good. The bodies of these men were buried in the courtyard outside of the building. As a prisoner, you belonged to the government. So once you became incarcerated, your human rights just didn't matter anymore. You were somebody who belonged to the penal institution, and that was it. So these men were buried within the walls of the prison in a standing position to ensure that they would never see the outside world or be able to rest in peace. There's a massive paranormal interest in J Ward, and absolutely widely so. Like when you take these places where really bad, hard stuff has happened, that tends to be the places where, spirits get trapped and people get drawn.
Shannon, with just the part that you've told me so far, I think you should be really proud that you have just wrapped this up into one episode.
Oh, we're not even close to being done yet.
How are you skipping over so many stories in what you've already said?
And I'm not even side questing that much. I'm so proud of myself.
I'm proud of you, but also so intrigued. This is what you do. You give little nuggets of wisdom and then I want to go and research it for hours.
Well, don't, because we will do future episodes on this.
Okay.
So where these guys were buried, and we did get to stand in this spot, there is some little arrows that are carved into the wall and some little memorial plaques. But the paranormal people talk a lot about how in the winter, which you can imagine, Victoria winters, we're out in regional Victoria.
Stone building.
Freezing, like so cold. We were there in the end of September, early October, and it was freezing then. Like we were still rugged up to the hilt and it was spring. So in the middle of winter, this place is freezing. And they often talk about this area where the three men are buried in the corner of the outside courtyard about how there's never a frost or ice in that area, which in itself is incredibly spooky, but it also could have something to do with the fact that these men weren't buried in coffins. They were encased in quicklime and then buried standing up, so that lime will be quite close to the surface. And I think that has something to do with regulating the temperature of the ground. So it might not be as spooky of an occurrence. There is a scientific explanation for that part. And it must be real if I'm looking at it, because I want the spooky story. I don't want the rational one. While this jail is there, Aradale Lunatic Asylum and its two sister asylums at Kew and Beechworth. Any bells ringing with Kew Lunatic Asylum? And Hamilton Burn, it was Kew Mental Asylum.
Yeah.
Where all of that kind of stuff was taking place.
Yeah.
So people who have listened to that episode are going to have a pretty good idea about the type of places these are. There was the three built at the same time, Aradale, Kew and Beechworth, and they were commissioned to accommodate the growing number of lunatics, and I'm using air quotes when I say lunatics because that's the word that they used at the time. Is it the word we use now? No, it's not.
Not okay.
Not okay. In the colony of Victoria. Construction on the asylum began in 1865 and it was open for patients in 1867. It was closed as an asylum in 1993. At its height, Aradale had up to 1,000 patients in its large complex with up to 70 interesting historic abandoned buildings. While asylums in Australia were in their infancy, locking up people with what were deemed socially problematic behaviours was not new, and it opened a wider spectrum of issues, including places to pop people that they didn't know what to do with. This led to men having a way to rid themselves of unwanted wives, somewhere to place a woman who had lost a husband and had no way to support herself, a place for powerful and influential people to dispose of people threatening to expose their injustice or criminal behaviour, and a place to house people with disabilities or mental conditions like dementia, epilepsy, Down syndrome, and autism. Now, we're going to play a little game, Megan. Have you got a piece of paper?
Phone?
I just need you to just put a dash when something could apply to you. Yeah, you good?
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a list of reasons for admission between 1864 and 1889.
And I'm tallying.
You're tallying
number.
anything that could be applied to you. Okay. Intemperance and business trouble. Kicked in the head by a horse. Hereditary predisposition. Ill treatment by a husband. Imaginary female trouble. Hysteria. An immoral life. Imprisonment. Jealousy and religion. Laziness. Marriage of a son. Masturbation and syphilis.
Your own son gets married. You don't marry your son just gets married.
I think in that context, it is like if a son is taking care of his mother, and a lot of this come down to when people were poor. So a son might have been taking care of his mother. He got married. The mother's no longer his responsibility.
Okay, so we're at syphilis, but I didn't put a tally mark down for that.
Excellent. So masturbation and syphilis. Masturbation for 30 years. Medicine to prevent constipation. Menstrually deranged.
What is that?
I think it's when you get a little bit deranged when you're menstruating.
Every single woman in the world is going to put a tally mark down for that.
Oh, yeah, they
I don't
are.
like the word deranged, though.
Yeah. Mental excitement. Novel reading.
What?
Novel reading. Nymphomania. Opium habit. Overaction of the mind. Overstudy of religion. Overtaxing mental powers. Parents that were cousins. Periodical fits. Tobacco and masturbation.
Together.
Apparently. They're listed together. Periodical excitement. Politics. Religious enthusiasm. Fever and loss of a lawsuit. Fits and desertion of husband. Asthma. Bad company. Bad habits and political excitement. Bad whiskey. Bloody reflux. Brain fever. Business nerves. Carbonic acid gas. I don't know what that is and I don't think I do want to know. Congestion of the brain. Death of a son in war. Deranged masturbation. Desertion by husband. Domestic habits.
What kind of habits?
I don't know.
I have some habits in my house.
Domestic habits. Domestic affliction. Domestic trouble. Dropsy. Egotism. Epileptic fits. Excessive sexual abuse. Because like one little bit of sexual abuse is not enough. I've got to wait till it's excessive. Yeah. Excitement. Exposure and hereditary. I don't know what that means. Exposure and quackery. Exposure in army. Fever and jealousy. fighting fire, suppress masturbation, suppression of menses. Menses is, again, periods.
Oh.
Yeah. So we're suppressing it. Yeah. The war, time of life, uterine derangement, venereal excesses, vicious vices, women trouble, superstition, shooting of daughter, smallpox.
I just have so many emotions. Sometimes I'm pissing myself laughing and then I'm going, oh, yeah. I mean, that's...
Yeah.
You can be institutionalised for that. That's bad.
Yeah. Shooting of daughter, you should probably
It's
be
bad.
institutionalised if you shot your daughter. But it could be that the shooting of the daughter led to that person's mental health condition as well.
Of course.
Yes.
Also terrible.
They don't give us any context. They
I just
give
feel
us a
like
list.
it doesn't compare to bad whiskey.
No, it doesn't. And sometimes if whiskey's bad, that wouldn't make me upset. I would have a reaction.
Not as upset as someone shooting your daughter.
So where were we? Smallpox. Snuff eating for 2 years. I don't know what snuff is and I don't know if I want
Is
to know.
that tobacco?
Oh, it could be. So if you eat tobacco for 2 years, is that what it is?
Yeah, the chewing stuff.
Yeah, because there used to be snuff boxes. Spinal irritation. Gathering in the head. Greediness, grief, gunshot wound, hard study, rumour of husband's murder, Salvation Army, seduction and disappointment. Look, I think we've all been there. Self-abuse, sexual abuse and stimulants, sexual derangement, false confinement, fearlessness of intellect, fell from a horse in war, or female disease.
Do I have female disease?
I probably do.
14, 16, 18, 20, 21.
I got 29.
I'm not surprised.
So I think it's pretty safe to say we're not getting out.
Mm.
Yeah. So that list has made its way around as a bit of a joke thing on social media, and you can see why. So this list that we've just covered was actually taken from the logbook of a West Virginian hospital for the insane, documenting admissions to the institution between 1864 and 1889. So that is the logbook and everything that they listed as to why those people were brought in.
Okay.
I read this list to Scott this morning and his response was they really don't like wankers.
I mean, I think it was okay if you didn't have a fever or tobacco.
I remember when we visited the asylum at New Norfolk in Tasmania, me and my friend, when we were travelling down there, went and did an evening tour through New Norfolk. It was horrifying. Like, it was so scary. But one of the things that they talked about often was how, like, if you were a male and you were caught masturbating, or there was even an insinuation that you're in a homosexual relationship, that you could be institutionalised, and often were. But that's about the only thing that was a real problem for men. For women, there was a whole pile.
But why did you do that?
So I wanted to originally, when I was planning this episode, talk about some of the treatments that we use within these places as well. But I'm going to save that deep dive for another episode. I'm not going to side quest Megan, but I'm just going to quickly give you a little list of that too. A big part of it was restraint. So, you know, being chained to walls, beds, straitjackets, electroshock treatment, not done under anaesthetic in those days, lobotomy and other experimental surgeries, water torture, and forced orgasm was another one. I think it was used quite regularly to help with women's troubles, mania, you know, that kind of stuff. They thought that might work. Probably the husbands at home, if they were doing their job properly, these women wouldn't have had to be institutionalised. And we can also probably thank the psychiatrists of the 1800s for one thing, and that is the invention of the vibrator. Top work on the women's issues, fellas. And now we'd all be locked up. They created their own set of problems. So anyway, in the aftermath of the Victorian gold rush, the Ararat jail was no longer required. And in December 1886, the jail building was proclaimed as the J Ward, part of the asylum that was used to house the criminally insane. This was only ever intended as a temporary facility. However, it remained open for 104 years. Criminally insane is a term that refers to someone who is not responsible for their actions due to a mental health disorder. However, for many patients in J Ward, this definition was used very loosely. We're going to take a bit of a deep dive into some of the most notable patients housed in J Ward. You might recognise some of these people. Charles Fossard was born in Noumea, New Caledonia, around 1882 and worked on ships as a young man. In 1899, he deserted the ship in St. Elizabeth while it was docked in Sydney and spent the next few years as a vagrant, wandering around New South Wales and later Melbourne and Adelaide, supporting himself by the occasional labouring work and petty theft. On the 28th of June 1903, he murdered an elderly man named William Thomas Ford in his house in Skye, shooting him 5 times with a pea rifle, and then stealing his boots and walking back to the Dandenong Ranges. Although reportedly a fairly talented bushman, he was found by police and Aboriginal trackers in the possession of the distinctive boots and charged with Ford's murder. Under interrogation, Fossard claimed to police that he had also murdered an Indian hawker named Sultan Alem at Miners Rest. He later withdrew parts of this claim, but when taken to the site of the murder demonstrated a good knowledge of the location, including aspects which had changed since the incident. At his committal hearing in August, Government Medical Officer Mr. J. A. O'Brien stated that Fossard was of unsound mind and prone to delusions and thus unfit to stand trial. He was committed to the J Ward prison for the criminally insane in Ararat at the Governor's pleasure, where he remained for the rest of his life. At his death in 1974, he had spent over 71 years in custody, making him the longest-serving prisoner in the world. Gary David, who is also known as Gary Webb, was the son of Rupert David, a habitual criminal and pedophile who served time in prison and psychiatric hospitals. His mother, Betty David, was an alcoholic. And really, can you blame her if that's who she was married to? David and his siblings were placed in an orphanage when he was 4. From that time until 1972, when he escaped from legal custody, he spent his life in a number of orphanages, boys' homes and youth training centres. At the age of 11, David began committing various offences, including larceny, making threats and offences of dishonesty. When he was 13, he was first diagnosed as having a personality disorder with psychopathic traits. David was subsequently admitted to psychiatric facilities on 8 separate occasions between 1976 and 1984 and was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. It was during this time that he began self-mutilating to an extreme degree. Among other things, he swallowed razor blades, cut off parts of his ears, his left nipple, injured his genitals, hammered nails into his feet, and swallowed corrosive liquids. In 1982, David was sentenced to 14 years imprisonment for the attempted murder of 3 people during a robbery gone wrong in a pizza restaurant in Rye, Victoria. The robbery appeared to be an attempt to draw police into a shootout. The pizza shop owner and one of the responding police officers were severely wounded in the incident, while David was wounded in the legs by police. A news crew spotted David fleeing the scene and he was arrested. While in prison, David wrote many manuscripts, one titled Blueprint for Urban Warfare, which spoke of committing massacres upon his release from prison. The blueprint listed 49 combat situations, ranging from horror movie cliches like cigarette dispensing machines dropping fingers and that kind of stuff. It was pretty morbid, so I haven't included a lot of that type of thing. But there was also some far more disturbing scenarios, such as the bombing of bridges and public buildings, the assassination of prominent politicians, the poisoning of water supplies, and indiscriminate shooting of public places. David later claimed that he had been instructed to write down more graphic fantasies as a form of therapy. He also manifested a great deal of hostility to the police force and prison system, resorting to violence and self-mutilation whenever his requests or demands were not met. In January 1990, David was declared mentally ill by government health department officials. The Mental Health Act 1986 entitled David to the right to appeal, which he did in February and March in 1990. In May 1990, the board found David was not mentally ill and recommended that he be discharged as an involuntary patient. This was a consequence of the board's assertion that personality disorders are not mental illnesses as per the Mental Health Act at the time. And the bastards were wrong. I'm happy to say that now, and it has been changed. The Victorian government faced the dilemma of respecting David's rights to freedom and the protection of the community upon his release from prison. The government sought to keep David imprisoned indefinitely by inducing the Community Protection Act 1990. That legislation gave Victorian Supreme Court judges the power to hold David in preventative detention for 12 months if the judge was convinced by evidence before them that David was still a risk to the community and likely to commit further offences if released from prison. David was an intelligent man with significant literary, analytical and computer skills, but he had a long history of responding to the most minor frustrations with violence, damage to property and self-harm, and refused on principle to cooperate with attempts to reduce such behaviours prior to his re-entry into society. The Supreme Court repeatedly applied the legislation to continue his confinement. David, then aged 38, committed suicide by ingesting razor blades that led to peritonitis. He died on the 11th of June 1993. At the time of his death, aged 38, David was still a prisoner at J Ward and had spent a total of 33 years in various institutions. It is said that he served more time in prison than any other person in the history of the state of Victoria. David spent a total of 33 years institutionalised.
It's a jail and a lunatic asylum?
It was a jail. The lunatic asylum, like they didn't need the jail anymore because Ararat was the gold rush was falling away. There was other bigger prisons in these large areas. So they would then take people who just needed to be in jail to places like Pentridge and Geelong and those types of prisons. So there was really no need for a permanent full-time jail in Ararat. So the lunatic asylum that had been built at the same time as the jail was in operation then took on the jail building as their J ward. The Aradale Asylum, which is what it's called, that's its official name, Aradale Asylum, but it is in Ararat, is massive, like huge, like a whole little town. And they had everything in there that those people needed. But what they didn't have was somewhere to house people who were dangerous. So the lunatic board, or whatever the government body was that looked after Aradale Asylum, then took on what was the Ararat jail and it became J Ward, which is where they housed the people who were criminally insane.
Okay, so the rest of Aradale had the people who masturbated and had a fever, but just J Ward had the violent people.
Yes. I wouldn't say just. I think when there were not enough places in Aradale, sometimes it could get sent over. If there was somebody who maybe had erratic behaviour but certainly was not criminally insane, they may have been placed over in J Ward. It was just a very convenient solution.
So that could lock them up.
Yeah.
And keep everyone safe, sure. You referred to it as jail though.
So originally it was a jail. And when these people were in J Ward who were criminally insane, they were still treated as prisoners because they had committed a crime. However, it had been deemed that they were not culpable of their actions because of the mental illness that they had.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're talking about the 1990s. This place was opened until very, very recently. We had severely mentally affected people living in jail-like circumstances while they were undergoing care. And the problematic part of that is that not every person in J Ward was a criminal, but everyone in J Ward was treated as a criminal. Many of them had committed crimes. There were some there who hadn't. And this is why I'm really hoping, and we'll talk about it a bit more, that we can have someone from J Ward come and have a chat to us and share the complexities of this stuff. My original plan was to really dive into this today, but I thought maybe just a little snippet of what it looked like, the history behind it, so we don't have to focus on that in another episode where we have a wealth of knowledge in front of us who can share what their day-to-day lives look like and what the difference between the two places was and some of the crossover. There was still a lot of women inside of J Ward. I bought a book when we were there. We obviously did the tour and we had an amazing guide who talked to us. They had a prisoner in Pentridge who was HIV positive. They didn't know what to do with him, and HIV at that stage was quite new and quite scary, and so they just moved them to J Ward. And then you're in there not only with just criminals, but really, really unwell people. It probably wasn't the right place for him, and when you look at how that turned out, not just for him but also for the staff, it wasn't the right choice. It was a, but why did you do that moment? You know, lots of amounts of women, Indigenous people who really hadn't done much wrong, all spent time within this place. That was just a lot of information in there about two people who are regarded and often talked about because of the length of their term. So Charles Fossard, which was the first guy that we talked about, he was the most longest serving prisoner in the world, but all of that wasn't in J Ward. It had been in different places, whereas Gary David or Gary Webb had been the longest serving prisoner in Victoria.
In J Ward. He'd been in J Ward the whole time, yeah.
Yes. So we've covered two of the stories of some of the more famous characters that have lived within J Ward. So we've covered those two, and then we've got two more to go. That's going to lead us to Bill Wallace, who has his own little story. Bill was born in Young in New South Wales in 1881 to Alexander and Walterina Wallace. In 1926, he was arrested in connection for the shooting death of an American man named William Ernest Williams at the Waterloo Cafe in King Street, Melbourne. It was alleged that Wallace had been angry at the man for refusing to stop smoking inside the cafe and waiting outside for him to leave before fatally shooting him. While a number of customers in the cafe had seen Wallace and Williams arguing about the cigarette smoke while eating lunch, there were no witnesses to the actual shooting, and Wallace refused to cooperate with questioning beyond basic information such as stating his name and his place of birth. Two separate doctors declared him to be insane and unfit to stand trial. He was subsequently sentenced to J Ward at the governor's pleasure. He was apparently quite happy living at J Ward, always wearing a suit which was bought annually from a tailor in Ararat, and spending his time playing chess and smoking, which is a little bit weird considering the fact that he was actually placed into J Ward for shooting a man because he was smoking inside of a cafe. However, he himself was a big smoker, so I don't think anyone's ever really been able to make much sense out of that. But he was also known for occasionally becoming violent and injuring some of his fellow prisoners. Publicity of his 100th birthday in 1981 led to a petition for his release, which was eventually granted. However, he refused to leave, allegedly responding with the words, "Don't be fucking silly, I live here." It was around this time that he was moved to the geriatric ward at Aradale Mental Hospital, where he spent the last years of his life before dying on the 17th of July 1989, only a few weeks short of his 108th birthday. Wow. He's now buried at Ararat Cemetery. And the last of the people that I'm going to talk to you today about, of the famous J Ward inmates, is Mark Chopper Reed.
Oh, I do know that name. And I've actually been referencing him recently during Movember, where some of my friends decided that a handlebar moustache was a good idea. Love to support the cause. Cannot stand the moustache.
Oh, they're so yuck. So yuck. But it seems to be a bit of a fad again now. We went through the bush ranger beard thing and now we've got the chopper
I
moustache.
feel like I prefer the bush ranger.
Men,
I guess it's their choice how they wear their facial hair.
let's not be judging them. So Mark Chopper Reed was transferred from Pentridge Prison in late 1978 after arranging for a fellow inmate to cut off both of his ears. Reed only remained in J Ward for a few months before being transferred back to Pentridge. I thought I knew just about everything there was to know about Uncle Chop, but it turns out some of the things he talked about might have been a little bit dramatised for comedic effect. For the non-Aussie listeners, Chopper is one of the most notorious yet kind of lovable characters in Australian modern-day crime. He was portrayed by Eric Bana in a movie adaptation of his life that differed somewhat from his own accounts, especially his stance on drugs. However, Chopper's response to this portrayal of being a drug user after being very vocal about being very against drugs was met with a comment of, well, you have to have tried something to be able to say you hate it. And that kind of just sums Chopper up. Like, he's just a man of wild contradiction. Chopper also, after he was released from prison, had his own stage show working alongside the disgraced police officer Roger Rogerson and wrote many books, a collection of crime novels, as well as a children's book called Hooky the Cripple. Have you read that with your
I have not.
No, I really want to read it now, though.
I don't think I want to read it to my children.
No, we should just read it ourselves. So it's not uncommon here in Australia for us to rally around anti-heroes, and Chopper is a prime example of this. I'll tell you a little bit more about his life in a more factual sense. Mark Brandon Chopper Reed was born on the 17th of November 1954 to a former Army and World War II veteran, father Keith Reed of Irish descent, and a mother who was a devout Seventh-day Adventist. He grew up in the Melbourne suburbs of Collingwood and Fitzroy. He was bullied pretty badly at school, saying that by the age of 15 he had been on the losing end of several hundred fights, and that his father, usually on his mother's recommendation, beat him often as a child. Reed had also been molested when he was young. Reed was made a ward of the state at age 14, and he was placed in several institutions as a teenager where he stated he underwent electroshock therapy. When he was still young, Reed was already an accomplished street fighter and the leader of the Surrey Road Gang, which had a notorious reputation for violence. He began his criminal career by robbing drug dealers based in massage parlours. He later graduated to kidnapping and torturing members of the criminal underworld, often using a blowtorch or bolt cutters to remove the toes of his victims as an incentive for them to produce enough money so that he would leave them alive. Reed spent only 13 months outside of prison between the ages of 20 and 38, having been convicted of crimes including armed robbery, firearm offences, assault, arson, impersonating a police officer, and kidnapping. While in Pentridge Prison's H Division in the late 1970s, Reed launched a prison war. The Overcoat Gang wore long coats all year round to conceal their weapons and were involved in several hundred acts of violence against a larger gang during this period. Around this time, Reed had a fellow inmate cut off both of his ears to be able to leave H Division temporarily. In his biography, Reed claimed he was able to avoid an ambush by inmates by being transferred to the mental health wing. However, I don't think it went to plan because he wasn't transferred to the mental health wing in Pentridge. He was taken away from the prison and put in J Ward, but he was only there for a few months before he was returned to Pentridge.
With no ears.
With no ears. I think the surgeons tried. His later words state that he did so to win a bet, but both of those obviously contradict each other and we won't ever really know what's true. The nickname Chopper was given to him long before his ears were cut off. It was based on a childhood cartoon character. Chopper is a dog that featured in Yankee Doodle. Do you know that cartoon?
Yankee Doodle?
No, it's called Yankee Doodle.
No.
I Googled it because I was like, that's wrong. But there is a cartoon called Yankee Doodle. I hadn't heard of it either. In 1978, while Reid was incarcerated, his associate Amos Atkinson held 30 people hostage at the Waiters restaurant in Melbourne while demanding Reid's release. After shots were fired, the siege was lifted when Atkinson's mother, in her dressing gown, arrived at the restaurant to act as a go-between the police and her son. Atkinson's mother hit him over the head with a handbag and told him to stop being so stupid. Atkinson then surrendered. After being transferred back to Pentridge, Reid was stabbed by members of his gang in a sneak attack where they felt that his plan to cripple every other inmate in the division to win the gang wars in one foul swoop was going a little bit too far. Another theory is that James, Jimmy Longan, a friend of Reid with Patrick Blue Barnes, wished to benefit from a contract put out on Reid's head by the Painters and Dockers Union. Reid lost several feet of intestines in that attack. There's a scene in the movie where Eric Bana is playing Chopper and he's like literally putting his intestines back into his body. It's a great movie. It really is. It's so good.
Oh, you sold it, mate.
Reid was serving a 16-and-a-half-year sentence after attacking a judge to get Longman released from prison. And that's the guy whose mum hit him over the head with the dressing gown. So he was in prison because he tried to get Chopper out. Then he went to jail and Uncle Chop Chop got involved in this thing because he was trying to help his mate.
I think we're both not in the best headspace here, but you did just say the mum who hit him over the head with a dressing gown.
The mum who hit him over the head with the handbag in her dressing gown.
Okay.
I really can identify with that mum. I like going places in my dressing gown.
I know you've hit someone with your handbag before too. The police got... Oh, sorry. Nope, that didn't happen, Elsie and Jack.
They know. Can you just imagine like sitting at home on a Sunday night and getting a phone call saying your son's got a whole heap of people at a restaurant held up and she's like, do I get changed? Nah, fuck it.
Absolutely.
I can relate to that woman.
Yes.
Anyway, so his poor mate didn't make it though. He died in the Jicka Jicka fire in Pentridge in 1987. In 1992, Reid was convicted of shooting Sydney Michael Edward Collins in the chest. The incident took place in Reid's car, which was in the driveway of Collins' residence in Evandale, Tasmania. The bullet was recovered from the back seat of the vehicle and Collins named Reid as the shooter. Pleading not guilty, Reid was convicted of committing an unlawful act intending to cause bodily harm, which was a downgraded charge from attempted murder, and sentenced as a dangerous criminal to indefinite detention. An appeal against the conviction was rejected by the Court of Criminal Appeal on the 24th of August 1993. A second appeal to this sentence was argued on the 28th of February 1994 on the grounds that it was manifestly excessive in respect to the dangerous criminal declaration. The second appeal was rejected on the 10th of March 1994. Reid was granted parole early in 1998 and regained his freedom. In 2002, Reid was again questioned over the disappearance of Sydney Collins, who is still, to this day, on the Australian Missing Persons list after going missing in suspicious circumstances. Before his death, Reid admitted to having murdered Collins in his last broadcast interview on the 60 Minutes program aired on the 20th of October 2013. Reid expressed no remorse for killing Collins, alleging that he was stupid for allowing Reid to shoot him on 2 occasions with his own gun. In the 60 Minutes interview, he also discussed the 1971 shooting of a union boss, Desmond Costello. The 1974 suicide of child sex offender Reginald Isaacs and the 1987 shooting of Semi the Turk. Reed claimed to have been involved in the killing of 19 people and the attempted murder of 11 others. In 1989, he turned up drunk on a live television show hosted by Elle McFeast and, to the outrage of many viewers, gave a colourful account of feeding a man into a cement mixer. In an April 2013 interview with the New York Times, Reed said, "Look, honestly, I haven't killed that many people, probably about 4 or 7, depending on how you look at it."
That's hilarious, Shannon.
I can picture his face while he's
Yeah.
saying it. That's what makes it. It's not funny that he's killed these people. It's very terrible.
Yeah.
But a lot of the people that he killed were also very,
That
very
makes it
terrible.
okay.
It's a bit of a Robin Hood thing. I don't know. Like they were all. Have you watched Underbelly?
Yeah.
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 Like they weren't good people. He's killing sex offenders. Like
4 or 7,
4 or 7 of them.
depending on how you look at it.
Maybe 19. I don't think you can actually believe a single word that comes out of his mouth. To sum it all up, poor Chopper contracted hepatitis C during his time in prison, probably as a result of using shared razor blades. In March 2008, he revealed he only had 2 to 5 years to live and required a liver transplant. However, he refused to agree to that procedure, stating that while a transplant would save him, he did not want one when an organ could be provided to somebody else.
Aww.
Yeah. We love you, Uncle Chop. In April 2012, he was diagnosed with liver cancer. He underwent surgery in July 2012 to remove the tumours from his liver, and late in September 2013, he was admitted to Melbourne Private Hospital in failing health. He died of the illness on the 9th of October 2013, aged 58, at the Royal Melbourne Hospital. So these little stories are just a snapshot of some of the more famous of the very many and varied inmates of the J Ward. Every single one of these people carries their own story. This place, honestly, was one of the highlights of our trip, and I have talked to Megan about it, and I'm like, maybe we could do a whole series, maybe. And I don't know, there's so many aspects of it that I would like to talk about, but it's really hard to convey in words how it feels to be inside of a place with such a horrific and barbaric past. I've always been thoroughly fascinated by psychiatric history and specifically the problematic practices that disguises abuse as care. A big part of going on this tour and hearing these stories, some of it is so horrific, but there's also some really beautiful stories about psychiatric nurses and people who worked within that place. Well, we've heard about what happened at Kew in the Anne Hamilton burn thing. Like a lot of those psychiatrists were doing really bad shit there. And some of them were doing similar things here. But there are a group of really solid core people who believe in patient care, and they all fall within those psychiatric nurses. So I think it's worth just giving them a little bit of an acknowledgement here, because I think they're the people who change the lives of, and we've mentioned some bad people today who did some really tough stuff, but all of those people, if we go based on a court of law, were not found guilty. Well, Chopper was found guilty of some, but they weren't fit to stand trial. These people were not okay, and it doesn't excuse what they've done. But when you hear about their lives and how they grew up and the trauma that they faced, it gives you a bit of a picture of, you know, how someone can end up. I think there's a saying that any human is only 4 meals away from committing murder. Like when you put poverty and hunger and not having your basic needs met, it doesn't take humans very long before you go from being someone who could never do something like that to somebody who is fighting to survive. So given all of this, I've put a request out to the Friends of J Ward, hoping that one of these amazing individuals who hold and are invested in the history and knowledge and they're often the people who conduct the tours, if you go to visit this place, might be willing to come on and have a bit of a chat with us. So I am hoping we can give that to you guys early in the new year, and that's where we'll kind of dive into a bit more of that deep stuff where I've got somebody who I can bounce ideas off and I'm not just spitting information at you out of a book, because I think they're conversations that need interaction and not just a paper that someone has written. So we're going to hold off on that deeper dive stuff until we can arrange that with someone there. So I really just wanted to give you a little teaser in the hope that someone who is as invested in this extraordinary place and its history as I am will join us to explore all of the things that I want to touch on early in the new year. Speaking of the new year, I want to take this opportunity to wish everyone a very happy Christmas, because this will be our last episode for 2024. When I was putting this together, I cried a little bit when I realised that because it's been a big year.
It's been an adventure.
It has. And I want to take this opportunity to thank this incredible human who is sitting across from me and acknowledge her role in making all of this happen. The countless hours of work required to get one of my silly little stories over the line and into your ears each fortnight. And here in the studio where I challenge her wholesomeness with morbidity and dark humour on a regular basis. This little thing that we have created all came about from Megan challenging me to push my own boundaries and belief in myself earlier this year. She coached me through the planning and the pivots of finding what worked and what it would look like. And in doing that, we have ended up here with all of you guys. And for that, I am very, very grateful. Thank you, Megan.
It's been an honour, and you need to be very proud of yourself too, because this is all you.
Well, it's not all me, and you make me look very, very good.
I just take out a few ums and ahs.
Maybe we should put an unedited episode just up so people can see the level of work that you have to do.
You were talking about maybe having a holiday special. I'll just get all the ums and ahs and so's and put them together and everyone can listen to them.
We could probably just produce like a little song about them.
Oh, my God.
It's so
You're
bad.
giving me a few weeks off. Maybe I will.
No, please don't. So here we go. So I'm positive that this episode is going to find all of you guys in the midst of the Christmas chaos as you prep the food and the gifts and brave the outside world that seems to go completely bonkers at this time of year. I'm going to remind you to take a deep breath and be extra kind to the people around you, especially the retail workers who don't get paid nearly enough to deal with the shit that they get flung at them at this time of year. We're going to take a fortnight off over Christmas and we'll see you again on the 19th of January. There are some exciting things coming for 2025, including a change to the title for both of us. Megan is becoming a great auntie and I am becoming a grandmother for the first time with the arrival of my son's little boy very, very soon. So while you guys are ringing in the new year, hopefully we'll be enjoying baby snuggles with the newest member of our family. Have a wonderful Christmas and New Year, and we're sending all of our love and best wishes to all of you and all of yours, and we will see you on the other side.
What a beautiful way to end another awful episode. Merry Christmas, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of If These Trees Could Talk. If you would like to access more about the places or information included in today's topic, please visit our website ifthesetreescouldtalk.com.au. If you would like to follow us on our adventures, check us out on Facebook or Insta. Our creative writer is Shannon Walters, and our podcast is produced at Bellevue Studio in the Hunter Valley with audio production by Megan Anderson. We love to hear your feedback, so please rate and review, and if you would like to hear more, please subscribe. We look forward to you joining us for our next adventure.